are safe from takeoff to touchdown. I've been on the job for 8 weeks, and my focus has been almost exclusively on safety, starting with the Independent Safety Review Team report, which examined ways to enhance safety and reliability throughout our national airspace. We've already taken action on several recommendations. Effective 2 weeks ago, the head of the Air Traffic Safety Oversight Organization now reports directly to me. We are filling every seat at the Air Traffic Control Academy in Oklahoma City. We're expanding the use of advanced training across the country with new facilities in Chicago and San Diego, and soon also in Nashua and Phoenix. We're working with aeronautical colleges and universities to move graduates quickly to on-the-job training from those facilities. And we're deploying tower simulator systems in 95 facilities over the next 2 years. The first system will be deployed next month in Austin, Texas. We know we need more air traffic controllers. We're working hard to hire from a variety of sources and keep them moving through the training pipeline. As the Chief Recruitment Officer for the agency, I want to let everyone know that in early spring, we will be starting to take applications for the general public to go to our air traffic control center in Oklahoma City. These are great jobs. They're not easy jobs, but they're important and very rewarding jobs. So we're looking forward to expanding the pipeline there. So tell your kids, your nieces, your nephews, and look for more information on our website, faa.gov. I also want to take a moment to thank the controllers who will be working throughout the holiday season to make sure that everyone gets to their destination safely, just like they did so successfully over Thanksgiving. In addition to their hard work, we're taking additional steps to keep traffic safe and smooth over these holidays. We've opened military airspace that will be available for moving north-south traffic on the East Coast. We're cooperating with the commercial space industry to limit launches during peak travel season. And we've also opened up this year 169 additional East Coast routes to accommodate more traffic. So as Secretary Pete mentioned, we're expecting a very busy season, but the FAA and the Department of Transportation are up to the challenge. I would remind all travelers, please be nice to your flight crews. They're there for your safety, and we have zero tolerance for disruption of flight crews. So thank you for coming today, and with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Pete for opening up for some questions.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Just before we go to questions, a final thing that I wanted to emphasize. One of this airport's many charms is the view of the United States Capitol. I remember being a high school student on a program for students to become more familiar with Washington, arriving here and looking out at that Capitol dome. I want to emphasize that what goes on in this building and what goes on in that building are not isolated from one another. Every time that there are threats from the House GOP to slash funding for transportation, that endangers the progress that we are making right now. And if we come back from the holidays in January and are facing another countdown to a shutdown, that imperils all of the progress that's been going on. We're doing everything we can with what we have. But if we have to go back to slowing down on modernizing our technological systems, if an extremist Republican shutdown means we have to stop training and hiring, that will have impacts across the national airspace, and it will lead to more disruptions to air travel. So I have to say, when you see some of the same elected officials always ready to make a partisan issue of any travel disruption, over there laying the groundwork for a shutdown or savage cuts or both, they can't have it both ways. And I'm hopeful that we will get the support we need from Congress to continue the work of modernizing the technology and growing the workforce for air traffic control. And with that, with some quarterbacking from my colleague Alexandra, we will go right over to questions. Well, this is exactly why we thought it was important both to look over their shoulder as they took care of passengers affected by the last meltdown, and to have accountability to ensure a strong economic incentive never to let that happen again. For any airline that is considering delaying or deferring the work it takes in terms of hiring, staffing, equipment to prevent a meltdown, I want them to look at the example of how much Southwest had to pay. $600 million in refunds and reimbursements and $140 million in penalties as a very good reason to not let that happen in the first place. So I can't speak for Southwest, and we're not telling them which IT system to buy. We're telling them not to let this happen again. And my sense is that they have learned that the hard way. But also the entire industry needs to see this as a signal that we're taking accountability to a different level. The cash element alone of this penalty was almost 10 times the most we've ever assessed against an airline, because we want to change the incentive and change the behavior in the sector.
Well, the delays in the system are primarily caused by weather and operational delays. So for air traffic control, it's less than 10%, so it's a small part of the puzzle. We will make sure that safety is always above efficiency. So if there is a shortage of air traffic controllers, we would reduce traffic to accommodate and make sure that everyone is traveling safely. Having said that, we haven't had to do that other than on the East Coast in the system generally. As far as fatigue goes, we're taking this issue very seriously. We're looking at launching a group to examine fatigue among air traffic controllers in the very short term to identify if there are risks. And if there are, we'll act accordingly to mitigate those risks.
I'll let Mike start on that one.
Well, I think the flights are very full, and so it's can be a pretty stressful experience flying. That's certainly part of it, and I think we've just continued to see less civil behavior than we have in airports. So I think what we can do is make it very clear that we have zero tolerance for that, and we will prosecute any of those cases to the fullest extent.
The only thing I'll add to that is just a message, and the message is largely backed by what the FAA is doing and the referrals for prosecution when somebody does something that endangers their flight crews. I guess my message is not endangering your fellow passengers is kind of the bare minimum here. Obviously, don't do that. Also, it would be nice if you could say something nice to the people who are getting you to where you're going. The number of people, from flight attendants to pilots to the folks pushing the wheelchairs here at the airport to the people who clean the plane, all of those people have a part in getting you to where you're going. Let's say, in addition to not assaulting anyone, be nice to them and thank them for what they're doing to get you to your loved ones this holiday season. So when it comes to the complaints, we take that as a sign that passengers believe they will get results when they complain to our department. We've been urging people to bring their complaints to us when an airline doesn't provide a required refund, for example, or they believe that the airline isn't living up to its commitments. Now that does create a lot of workload for a small but mighty team of investigators and personnel that we have at DOT, but they work day in, day out to process that, and I think our follow-up on those complaints has clearly made a difference in terms of people getting their money back or getting taken care of. So it's tough to know what the baseline is there, given how much work we've done to encourage people to speak up. What I'll say is that we're going to keep working to address those complaints and make sure the airlines do the right thing. In terms of delays, they're higher than we would like them to be. Right now, the rate of on-time performance, historically it's sat somewhere between the high 70s and occasionally goes over 80%. Right now it's at 76%. I'd like to see it work back up toward 80%. And as we've gotten cancellations to an unusually low level, what I'd like to see us work on going into next year is keep cancellations nice and low and see what we can get the airlines to do to be more consistent on the delay front, get back up toward the high 70s and eventually to 80 and better. Well, a lot of it is making sure that the airlines have that economic incentive. It's one of the reasons why we're looking at a compensation rule for major delays, which would mean not only does the airline have to cover your hotel or your meal if you're stuck in the airport for a long time, but actual cash compensation for the cost to your time. And by the way, there's a bit of an experiment underway in terms of Southwest's required $75 vouchers that they'll be doing for the next 3 years. It will be interesting to see if other airlines decide to do that, not as punishment, but as competition. We'll see what happens while simultaneously working on the rule. The point is, we got to make sure we keep applying pressure with incentives for airlines to do their part. Now, the other part that we have to face is that the number one cause of delays is and has always been weather. And the inescapable reality is that extreme weather has systematically increased over the years. And every scientist and meteorologist I've consulted thinks it will continue to do so. If we cannot completely avoid what is already upon us, despite all of our good work on mitigating the effects of climate change, we need to prepare for that too and work with airlines, including in terms of realistic scheduling, to accommodate those realities. So let me take those three pieces in turn. On the rule, we want to do it soon, but I don't have a date to announce right now on that. We got to make sure we do it right. On the vouchers, it will be very interesting to see how the market responds to this. It's part of an enforcement action, but as part of that enforcement action, Southwest just became the highest level that is there. Others offer, I think, 25 points or some combination of miles. Whether their competitors will respond by matching is something I'll be interested to see. Wouldn't be a bad thing to see that, but it's not going to stop us from working on the rule because what we see in a lot of other jurisdictions is, frankly, a much higher level. So we don't really know yet how the market will respond, but we're certainly going to be watching closely, and I think that that will provide data points that can inform the rulemaking. Did I miss the third? I'm trying to... Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we've set a new precedent that includes several things. One thing that we've done with that precedent is basically added a 0 to the severity of historic penalties to make sure that they actually work. Another is to signal that we're willing to be creative about how to keep the majority of the value going not to the Treasury but to the passenger. It's going to vary from case to case, but given that we successfully arrived at that compensation regime as part of the settlement here, I think it's definitely going to become part of the toolkit in future enforcement actions. We'd rather not have to do the enforcement action in the first place, but if and when we do, this alongside cash has become a new mechanism that we may turn to. Well, it's really about the resilience of the system. The system will always have lots of points in it that are dependent on other points within that same system. And that's why when you have a storm hit one hub, another place, even with the sun shining and a blue sky, might find that they're experiencing weather delays related to that. We get that that'll happen. What happened a year ago is a good example. The entire system got knocked back on its feet by an epic winter storm. But then the entire system got back on its feet, except one airline, which spiraled into worse and worse conditions. It's one of the reasons why we viewed that as a control, even though it started with weather, we ultimately viewed it as controllable. In other words, the airline's responsibility, because we saw the other airlines bounce back. So it's the resilience that we're working on. Yes, there will be curveballs, weather or other events. One thing we're watching right now is the volcanic eruption in Iceland, which could affect international routes. Nobody can prevent that. But is your airline and is the system as a whole resilient enough that it can absorb that, reorient, and get back on its feet? That's what we're looking for. It has shown significant signs of improvement in 2023. Obviously, another test of that will be the results we get through Christmas and New Year's coming up right now. Yeah.
So their scheduling, their issues that they have. What have you learned that could apply in future people in the industry taking concerns about realistic scheduling?
So my sense is that the industry is aware that we are watching this much more closely than in the past. And I would say in the course of this investigation, it's helped the department further develop our capabilities to monitor and enforce on unrealistic scheduling, which, among other things, is a problem, obviously from a customer service standpoint, also from a competition policy standpoint, because knowingly unrealistic scheduling can be a method of unfair competition. It was not, as you noted, it was not part of the finding in this investigation. So these penalties hang on customer service failures, notification failures, and refund and reimbursement failures. But we continue to have active investigations in other cases related to unrealistic scheduling. That's about as much as I can say on it for now. Yeah, I got you.
I'll start with the Secretary of Buttigieg. I don't think it's any secret that every major U.S. carrier has had at least one operational meltdown, either in 2022 or this year as well. Are you talking with airline CEOs leading up to this latest meltdown rush? Are they telling you how confident are you? Is something similar to Thanksgiving where there's some memorable flights and things during the news based on the cancellation requirement? And then for Administrator Whitaker, I see different numbers online. Do you have an actual number as to the staffing of your travel controls right now? And what does a fully staffed ATC workforce look like, given that the number of flights is increasing? Or would you like to see that?
Thanks. So for my piece, my sense from the industry is that they are expecting this robust demand, even record demand, to continue. Whenever I speak to an airline CEO, they tell me about all of the steps that they say they are taking to meet that demand, but the proof really is in the results, and that's what we look for ultimately. And I will say, the results across 2023 so far have been encouraging. A very different summer holiday season from what we saw a year prior, where there were blue sky cancellations, and a very healthy Thanksgiving. So, we can't make guarantees on behalf of the airline industry for how Christmas and New Year's will go, but I will say there's been a lot of improvement, and that's exactly what I expect, especially because, again, if they don't do the right thing for passengers, we're going to be here on the back end. I'll let Mike speak to, he could probably speak to that as well as to your question on controllers.
Thank you. Yeah, the airlines actually are in constant communication with us through the command center, and they're embedded in the command center, so we have a sort of a daily dialogue, actually an hourly dialogue during difficult times. So there's very close coordination between airlines and FAA on delays and implications of weather. For the controllers, we currently have just under 11,000 certified controllers. I think the number is 10,700. There are different views on what the number should be, but it needs to be a lot higher than it is. And we know that if we hire as aggressively as possible over the next 3 years, that should put us much closer to where we need to be. I think you often hear 3,000 more controllers, but I think it's less important what the target number is than it is to just hire as many as we can get over the next 3 years, and that's what we're focused on. No, what we plan to do is hire as many as we can over the next 3 years, and then work with the Transportation Research Board to look at the various models to make sure we're getting the best inputs and have a reliable model that we all agree on for what the staffing level ought to be.
Poquito. Just on the last bit, I want to say one number I should put out there is the President's budget requests the resources to hire 1,800, but that'll only happen if Congress comes through. So another connection to the other building. En español, hemos visto mejores importantes a través del sistema y lo más importante, por supuesto, es la seguridad, pero también la eficiencia del sistema. Y por eso estamos invirtiendo en los aeropuertos, en la infraestructura, y también tenemos acciones para asegurar la confianza en las aerolíneas y su capacidad para tener éxito con los resultados para todos los pasajeros. 2.9 millones de pasajeros en un día después de Thanksgiving, y cada año 16 millones de vuelos que llegan seguramente gracias al personal del FAA, del sector de aviación de las aerolíneas, y estamos siempre trabajando para mantener este nivel de seguridad. Okay. Pete? All right. I would say we know that weather is coming our way. It's why you want to make sure that you're keeping in touch with your airline. The big thing that we can control, though, that airlines need to control, is how resilient the system is to that weather. Look, the reality is every winter presents storms. We're also living in a time when storms are getting more frequent and more severe. They just are. That's reality. But how we respond to that and how airlines respond, that's their job. And what Southwest demonstrated is there is a tipping point where we go from an act of God to the airline's own readiness. And that tipping point is where we hold them accountable. Does that make sense? Look, there's a big difference between a delay and a cancellation, and I think that the cancellations are what have caused the most distress, but the delays are a real problem as well. Now, so far this year on the cancellation front, we're at 1.2%. Below 2 is what I would consider healthy. Closer to 1, if we can keep it that way, that's encouraging. That does invite us to pay more attention to the issue of delays and to press the airlines on how they're behaving. I think some of the rules we have underway will adjust the incentives to help mitigate delays. We know we've got our part to do on the ATC side, which is why we're urging Congress to help us out with that. Look, if you look at the trend line back the last 30, 35 years, you'll see it tends to hover relatively consistently somewhere in the high 70s to low 80s in terms of on-time performance. I want to see us closer to 80, and we're not there yet. Thanks, everybody. All right, good job.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Nice Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but it sounded good.
As long as it sounds good. I find you get credit for trying, even if it's
Yeah,
not,
no,
even if
absolutely.
it's not A+.
No, that's perfect.